Hey, if you're like me, then you've got those down times too, where the times when you wonder whether you really matter and how important you are in the big scheme of things and whether anyone really cares about you. I've been loving some parts of the story of Gideon from the Old Testament of the Bible. I find it in Joshua chapter 6. You see, when we're introduced to Gideon, he's kind of like a nobody. But God's the expert at turning nobodies into somebody. And Gideon is described to us as Joash's son. It's kind of like, he's already pigeonholed, stereotyped, like father, like son. And you know what it is when people, they sort of dismiss you because of the family you come from, or because of the work you do, or because of something you'll say know about you. So this is Gideon. He's not going to amount to much. He's just his father's son. He's a farmer, and that's all he's going to do. The other thing about Gideon that I find really, really fascinating is that when we first find him, it's what he's doing. He's hiding. He's trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, and he's actually terrified. He's afraid. He's trying to hide the food for his family for the year, because every year, you see, after the harvest, these raiders would come in from the desert and they would take all the food. And Gideon is just afraid because they're going to come again. They're going to do what they've always done, and his life is just in a rut. It's one thing after another. And I think you know the story. You might be living it right now. But God finds Gideon even though he's trying to hide. And so the angel of the Lord finds him there where Gideon is, where he's hiding the food. And God speaks to Gideon through the angel of the Lord. And God says to him, "The Lord is with you, Gideon, you mighty warrior." Now, the really bizarre thing about that is that a mighty warrior was the last thing that Gideon was. In fact, there he was, is being afraid, suffering from anxiety and stress and deep fear, and God calls him a mighty warrior. How can that be? Well, I'm kind of reminded of the passage in Romans chapter 4, where we're told that God is the one that brings things into existence that don't exist. You see, what God is doing is he's bringing the future, Gideon's future, into his present. That's what God does all the time. He's an expert at turning nobodies into somebody. He's done it millions of times, and he's doing it in my life. I believe it, and he wants to do it in your life as well. And so when God calls Gideon a mighty warrior, God does what I so often do. Even when someone gives me compliments, I know I shouldn't do it. Something deep inside me, I push back. And Gideon sort of says, well, if God is with us, why are all these things happening? If God is with me, why am I hiding here? I'm no mighty warrior. But Gideon decided to do what I have to do every day, and you do too. And he decided to take it step by step in faith with God. And he became that mighty warrior, and he fulfilled the destiny that God had for him. The reality of God is much greater than the reality that we see and detect with our five physical senses. We tend to think that what the things we hear with our ears and see with our eyes and taste with our hands and those kinds of things, physical reality is the ultimate test of what's true. But the Bible tells us that that spiritual reality is the greater reality. So when God says it, it is true, even in spite of every evidence to the contrary through our five physical senses. It's only because Gideon accepted that he was able to move forward. And that's what we need to do to move forward in our lives as well. I don't know the reality that you're living in right now, but I know that it's not the ultimate reality, the ultimate destiny, the ultimate calling that God has called you. And so the other thing I don't know is what is the specific name that God is calling you. He called Gideon a mighty warrior when Gideon didn't think he was. What's the thing that you don't think you are, but you wish in your greatest dreams that you could be in your life, that you could be for God? Perhaps God is calling you that name right now. And don't push back. Don't do what Gideon did. Although I don't know the specific name that God is calling you, I do know a name that he calls everyone who chooses to follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, who chooses to accept his will for their lives by faith. I know it because it's a name that he's given me, and I've heard it so clearly in my own prayer life. And I know that he's calling you by this name as well. You know what it is? My child. And that perhaps is the most important name that he could ever call you. So step up, step forward, embrace it, accept it, and live in that reality.